Well, it won't be a white Christmas in the worm bin, but it's certainly going to be a cold one. Hello again. So this video is going to be a quick roundup of the worm bins and the garden at the end of 2019. You can see the one working tray of the worm tower there. The worms have been busy on the roof. And the approach that I'm now taking with the worms that are escapees or get on the roof is that effectively they volunteered to go into the clothing compost bin. So the experimental bin that I've got there on the left, you can just about see the worms being dropped into that. That's the bin with the cotton t-shirt in it. Now if you remember, I started that bin off with very few worms actually, so what I'm doing now is any worms I find on the roof or anywhere else, they're going into that bin. So here's a quick look at the tray. That's the worms' Christmas presents. You can see the melons have added a lot of moisture to the worm bin, and as a result we've had a little bit of an explosion in springtails. That's all the white dots that you can see there. They don't bother the worms in the slightest, and in fact the only issue with them is when they become very large in numbers and form huge clumps, they become a little bit of a problem in a worm bin, especially if it's indoors. But outdoors in the greenhouse, they're not a problem at all. The only thing it tells me is I just need to keep an eye on the moisture level in this tray. So there's clumps of the springtails there, and the next session of the 1 minute with the composters is going to be on springtails. So we'll take a closer look at them. It's 6 degrees in this greenhouse. This is a very cheap plastic greenhouse. It's got holes just about everywhere, and the zips at the front don't close up. So it is actually as cold in the greenhouse as it is outside. The only thing that the greenhouse is doing is just keeping the excessive rain that we've had here for the last 2 months off the worm bin. There's a closer look at the white dots, which are the springtails, and although I've got an update coming for the compostable wrap, as we're having a quick fly through everything for the end of the year, that's the corn cobs I put in there. The compostable wrapper, absolutely no discernible difference in it whatsoever. It's as strong as it was. It appears to have softened up a little bit in the first couple of months, and now it's no difference whatsoever. But it's not causing the worms any problem, and I'm going to continue to leave the bin there. I did contact Oxford University to ask them if they could tell me what their postal wrappers were made of, but I never got a response. I'm guessing it's some sort of cornstarch or potato starch, but you can see it's still quite firm, really not breaking down at all in a worm bin. Now that's not to say that it's not compostable. That is, to claim something is compostable is actually a legal, inverted commas, claim, if you like. So this will have had to have been tested at some point to be compostable, and there's various criteria it needs to meet, such as breaking down within a set period of time and breaking down into very small indistinguishable pieces and so on and so on. But I suspect it was done in an industrial type compost setup, not a home compost setup, although the label at the front of that wrapper did say it was suitable for home composting. So maybe if I get another one, I'll put it into one of the Dalek type bins, which has much bigger volume and I can hot compost in. So that might be something to try for next year and see how it does there. But certainly in a worm bin, it will break down. It's going to disintegrate, but not for a very, very, very long time. However, I'll keep the updates coming. Now, as you can see, the cold doesn't seem to be bothering the worms all that much. They're lively, they're active, they're looking very well, and as things stand at the moment, I have absolutely no concerns about this working tray. I haven't winterized it, I haven't tried to keep it warmed up in any way. There's a look at the sump. Because there hasn't been a huge amount of food scraps going in, there's not an awful lot of leachate coming out of the one working tray that we have. The white dots that you see in that dark liquid, that's actually a swarm of springtails, so they're even in the sump. There's so many of them now. So all I'm going to do now is give them a little extra treat for Christmas, which is a couple of more slices of melon and then some liquidized food scraps. That's their Christmas pudding. And I'm just going to cover that up and put these guys away now for Christmas and the New Year. That will keep them happy into the first week of the New Year. And there's another escapee who, like I said, they're now going to volunteer for the t-shirt bin. So while we're here, let's have a quick look at that. Not a whole lot happening. If you remember, this would be the 4-week update for this bin if I was going to look at it in depth. I set it up with a couple of buckets of horse manure, and I put in one of my daughter's old cotton t-shirts. I then added a couple of handfuls of worm, but actually there wasn't all that many worms to begin with, so this is going to be quite a slow process. I did put in 2 shirts, but because it's so cold, I actually put the heavier purple shirt on the top of the bin. There's no cover on it, and as you can see, there's not an awful lot of evidence of worms escaping along the side, and that will be because until it actually gets dark outside, there's light getting in on this bin, so it's encouraging them to stay down. It's very, very cold to the touch, so the worms will have slowed down in here anyhow. Not really a great time to start an experimental bin right in the middle of the winter when you're pretty much exposed to the elements apart from a small bit of plastic. Like I said, there you can see it's just 6 degrees in here. And it'll be the same temperature in the bin because there's nothing in there to generate any sort of major heat. So what will happen over the next month or two is I'm hoping the worm population will grow, but it'll grow much slower at this time of year than it would in the warmer months. And if you have a quick look at the t-shirt, it's absorbing liquid from the horse manure. It's quite heavily stained now. That's good. There's going to be a lot of bacterial activity on that shirt quite soon, and that's going to encourage the worms to start nibbling at the bacteria. Just for a bit of variety, because I'm sure at some point they'll get tired of the horse manure. So there's going to be no food put into this. They're going to just live in the bedding, and when they want to eat, at some point when the population is big enough, only food they're going to have in here is the cotton t-shirt. So that's a quick look at the bin. Really, what to report is there's nothing to report as of yet. We'll see how it'll look in 4 weeks' time, but again, because we're coming into January, I'm not expecting it to be a whole lot different. Probably around Easter time I'd expect to start to see some change in this, but you can see the cotton's not broken down. The worms are not pushing their way through there at all yet. So really, they're not showing a great amount of interest in it. And that is, I'm putting that down to 3 factors. The cold, because everything is much slower in the bin. The bedding, and because they have a ton of food in that horse manure as it stands, so they're not exactly hungry going looking for food. And the rather small number of worms that I've actually started this bin off with. But it's one of the things I do when I set up a bin. I tend to set it up with a small number of worms just because I like watching the population grow. Not really a great way to run an experiment, but I like to see the number of worms expand into the space they've got available. But they're looking well, they're looking healthy, they are quite lively despite the cold, and as things stands, I've got no concern about this bin. Probably, if this persistent cold keeps up, I may need to do something about winterproofing it a little bit. You can see my breath there, it's so cold. It's alright at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now you'll remember this bin sits on top of a sheet of cardboard, and it's something I do with all the outdoor bins is I put cardboard or leaves around, and I'm bound to find some escapees, and there you go, there's one there. Little problem focusing, but you can see the casts on the cardboard, so that's evidence there's been a lot of worms passing through. There's another guy's tail there. If I lift this up, we may see some underneath here. There's a couple at the far end. So in time I'll just remove them and add them back into the bin. But it's important that when they do escape they have somewhere damp and wet to get to. Now we're out at the some of the bigger bins at the top of the garden. This is my Santa sack full of all the presents for the good worms. Here's a look at the Dalek. That's gone down quite a lot. The worms are still quite active in here, and again it's going to be about the same temperature. It's going to be 5 or 6 degrees in here because this is a very cold. I can feel the cold through the glove even, but the worms are still active and they're still at the surface. So again, we're looking at 5 or 6 degrees here. The bin is not winterproofed yet. It's something I may get round to doing. But unless you have in the UK, we tend to get very strong cold snaps from time to time, but we don't get anything like the winters our American friends get, where you have weeks upon weeks of very, very low temperatures, ice and snow. So in the UK, especially the southern parts of the UK, I'm not entirely sure how important it is to winterize the bins. Now there's various ways you can do this. You can line the insides and outsides with cardboard, you can put some of the bubble wrap around the outside. You can, like I've done in previous years, put very large amounts of leaf on the top so you create a nice depth for the worms to go in on the leaves, trap any heat there may be. leaves or shredded cardboard. You can make hot spots within the bins, which I've done when I had the worm pit. So the worms the hot spots tend to get very hot very quick, so the worms stay away from it, but then move closer and closer to the heat as it dies down a bit, and they last a couple of days, and then you'd create another hotspot. So there's various methods that you can use, but certainly in my part of the UK I question how important it is to do, really, and it's all a bit of a hassle, and the worms so far are fine. Now obviously if we're going to have a terrible cold snap, I will winterize these bins. I will do something to try and keep some of the heat in, or not let, I shouldn't, there's not much heat to begin with, but not let them get much colder than what they are now. But you can see they're not very deep down, they're quite close to the surface. There's still the remnants of a couple of those windfall apples that I got, and they're working on them on the surface quite happily. So at the moment the cold is not causing them a problem, other than if I was measuring their work rate, they will have slowed down considerably. But outside of that, it doesn't seem to have any negative effect. So there's their little stocking filler. Of course, there's always one guy there. Look, he's about to make a run for it. He's changed direction now that he's seen the melons. There you go. Here's the biggest of the outdoor worm bins. I've got a lot of wood chip and shredded paper and cardboard on top of this. That's because I was going to use it for another bin, and then things changed and I just needed to get rid of it. I needed a container the stuff was in. But that's a hard wood chip, so it's going to take a while to break down. But the worms, again, quite close to the surface, working away quite happily. This bin is now practically full to the top. After I filmed this, I actually added a lot of the dead leaves and stuff, old plants from that I harvested, crops from this year. So it's now actually full to the top. So sometime around February or so, I'm going to have to empty that bin. And there's a look at the leaf mould. This process fascinated me. It started off with something like 30 odd large council bags of leaves, which I got into, I think it was 4 of the 1 ton bags, which then went into 1 of the 1 ton bags, which then completely filled this area. And now this area is half of the volume that it was. And the worms, there's worms have got in there. Obviously escapees have found the worms, have found the leaves, and it's forming very nice leaf mould, which I'll probably sift sometime around the summer. We're going to move indoors now, and if you watched the November update, you'll know that the basil was in the little seed trays. I've now potted the basil and the cornflower into their own little pots, along with the parsley, and these are going to be Christmas presents. I've got far too much here. We would never use anything like this, but I'm going to give these to some people as part of their Christmas presents. And I've got a video coming out on this, which is pinching out the grown tips of the overwintering sweet pea. Here's a lesson I learned. Now, the Conversation Shed, Russell from the Conversation Shed, tagged me in 3 things I've learnt this year, and it's coming towards the end of the year now, so we're really out of time with this, so I want to squeeze this in, as he was good enough to nominate me. And one of the things I think I learnt this year is not to be in such a hurry to start seeds. It's a very difficult time of year, this time of year in our climate, because really from end of October, November through to February, there's very, very little you can do outside. It's very difficult. It's very hard when you're looking at all your packs of seeds and you just want to get things growing and you want to see some new life come through. You can see they've all done well, but the issue, and this is linked to the lesson learned, is I have to keep these all alive now until April or May. So and space is a real issue. I think for next year, and I've started some peppers as well, so there you go. This might be a case of do as I say, not as I do, because although it's a lesson learned, yeah, it's something I really need to think about. I've got to think about practically and realistically the amount of space that I have when it comes to starting seeds, and to be a little bit more disciplined and not be too eager to get everything started, because it's fantastic to see all these sweet peas. There's 2 types, there's allspice and incense, and if I can manage to keep them alive until I get them plotted out, they're going to make a lovely spread of colour in the garden and down on the allotment. But I have this, I've got 120 days or so before I can actually get them out. They're getting very leggy. That's why I am pinching out the growing heads, which are supposed to make them grow bushier. They'll still grow as tall, but they'll be bushier, because the young plants are now going to be forced to push out more side shoots. So yeah, so linking into Russell from the Conversation Shed's 3 things I learnt this year, I think that's one of them. Think carefully about the amount of space that I actually have. Realistically, the space I can use, and then and think about timing when it comes to starting seeds off, because it was great fun in October and early November to see these guys come to life, and now I've got to babysit them for the next 4 months. Not so much fun. Still, they're looking healthy and well, apart from the 4 that I lost. Hopefully, if I can keep these guys alive, they'll make a nice display of flowers in the garden and the allotment. Not an awful lot has changed in the garden, other than there's now evidence of all the bulbs I planted coming through, so that's exciting. And you can see lots of evidence there of the earthworms, which is a really good sign. I've got the garlic planted in here, and I've repositioned this rhubarb, and again you can see everything covered by nets, because the cats destroy everything in the garden and use every pot, tray and area of the garden as their personal litter tray. Everything I do now I'm going to have to keep covering with nets. That rhubarb was tucked against the wall, and what I wanted to do is just move it into the middle. That's going to just be one rhubarb crown in there. So all I did was move it and then added lots of manure. This is the rose. Allotment Life, Brian from Allotment Life commented on the November update that I had a couple of leaves showing on this, and he did point out, quite rightly, something I didn't think about because I don't know the first thing about growing flowers, and especially roses. He pointed out that seeing early growth of leaves is not a good sign because sharp frost and it's done for. So what I'm doing now, there's a lot more leaves on this, as you can see, and what I'm doing is bringing it indoors now in the evening. Now, having just said that one of the lessons I learned this year was not to be in such a hurry to start seeds, I'm going to go ahead and start some chili and pepper anyhow, because it's lessons for next year and it's still 2019 and I can't help myself. The seeds on the bottom left there in that plain packaging, they're very old and out of date, so I'm not going to sow those pepper seeds. The serrano seeds are my own saved seeds from the chili plants that I've got overwintering, and they're still doing well. We didn't have a look at them in this video, but they're doing great. These ice cream containers I keep for seed starting, just put some holes in the bottom, and they're a perfect size for the top of the vivarium or the heated mat, and the shape of the lid makes them really, really good as seed starters. So I'm going to use some new compost, and that is another lesson. I think I've got a habit of rejuvenating as much compost as I can, and what happens is when you use it to sow seeds, you end up with all sorts growing through, and unless you actually know what the seedlings look like, I'm never too sure sometimes what's coming up. So I've got the 4 lots of 2 chilies, 2 peppers sown there, just sitting on top of the soil at the moment. New compost with some perlite mixed in. That's all that is, and dampened down before I put the seeds resting on the top. And the different types of pepper and chili seeds, they all look very alike. So this is lesson number 3, and that is label things, because the amount of times that I've said to myself during 2019 and 2018 and 2017, oh, it's the only thing I've got grown in that type of pot, so I'll remember what it is, and then 2 weeks later, not a clue what I planted. And like I mentioned, if I don't actually recognise the type of seedling coming up, then I've no idea what's growing. So all I'm going to do now is lightly cover the seeds with some of the fresh new compost and wet them down. And that's chilies and peppers sown. I think the back of the packet said sow in February, so we'll count this as almost January. There's only a day to go, so we'll call this January. So I'm starting these about 4 weeks ahead, and we'll see how it goes. And that's it. That's an update. The strawberries are doing well. I didn't see them in this video, but I wanted to. It's gone on for far too long as it is. But everything else in the garden that you saw in the November update, it's all doing well. And it only remains for me to wish you all a very happy new year. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll leave you with a bonus lesson that I've learned in 2019. Don't distract a 5-year-old when she's in charge of the hose.
Caitlin!